Greetings, Marsh here, and welcome to episode 35 of my Pyanodon's playthrough. In this episode, we finish our main bus, as well as upgrade our factory with electric assemblers everywhere they are practical. Enjoy. So the next step here is kind of monotonous. Whenever you have major parts of the factory that need to be changed, a lot of times you'll hesitate working on them just because it's a lot of work and you won't actually get any new utility out of it because it's just going to do the same thing we've already done. And of course, that same thing is our minibus here. However, it will be more expandable in the future. And I've shown how to do one build, so the rest of them are essentially the same, just in different ways. And I think that the most entertaining way of showing this on YouTube would just be to build it off screen, but then hook up everything for the first time and we can watch it together. So I will get on that and be back. Well, for you, it'll be a second. For me, it'll be a while, but I'll see you in a second. And I'm back. That took about 5 hours or so. I didn't just build our little minibus here, but also pretty much everywhere in the factory. If it could take an electric assembler, it got it. That said, it didn't take as long as I was expecting it to, and it was nice to kind of just play the video game. That when I am making things for YouTube, you know, I have to consider that people will be watching, I have to talk, and then I have to edit it after the fact, and sometimes it's nice just to play and not do any of those things. So sorry if you would have been the kind of person that would have been interested in seeing all these get built, but I figured that it was more effort than it was worth, and only a relatively small amount of people would actually want to see all of it. Most of these should work. I did test a lot of them, and then I loaded a previous save to reset it to this clean state. So let's start going through everything. Well, first we have more items on our minibus. Some came from the right because they already existed and others were delivered. And some items get their own belt and some share sides. And that decision was made based on how easy it is to make a full belt of items. So since we're already making a full belt of aluminum, it gets its own belt. Whereas other things like with our rubber and chromium here, we're not making nearly as much of them, so they share sides. And the way that you can split a single item off, it's kind of hard to see with all these belts in here. If you put a splitter on the main belt and put it off to the side and then have a filter for the item you want and then leave the other side empty, you can use that to pull half of a belt. And I do this because you don't know which side is going to have what item, and that is just easier. It's funny that the light turned off. That shows you how much time passed, that it's almost daytime now. So some belts only have one item on it, because I tried to put finished items on the right and raw items on the left here. I didn't know what item would share this belt with circuits later, but I still put the splitter in here anyway. So if an item does go on there, it will just work. And you could use the underground trick to split things off, but what happens if the items like switch sides or something? I think this is just a little more useful. And there's kind of a repeating pattern here we have for delivering items. That, like with rubber and chromium, well, first of all, we have caravans bringing items in. Since this is the beginning of a bus, it probably makes sense just to have them be completely full. So that's a lot of rubber and a lot of chromium. And then if you put 8 inserters, you can fill half of a belt and then it goes down, and then you could repeat it on the other side for other items. Glass is kind of done the same way, even though it's basically a full belt. And actually, that's something worth talking about, is that I'm starting to transition to delivering glass via the caravans, as opposed to with the 3-pipe method of liquid, glass, fuel, and hot air. I didn't change the entire factory out, but nonetheless, I think it makes more sense with the stage of our factory to do this local to where the glass is being made, and then just take the items and send those everywhere. So here's our build for glass. If you just want to look at the numbers, it's actually slightly less than is necessary for 15 a second, but it's pretty close, and the caravan here is waiting for more. And one thing I did is I put these iron chests down, because earlier I mentioned that if you don't use iron chests for anything, that if you do use them, it can be then a signpost of sorts that you can use to find things. So for example, we have these 13 iron chests sitting around, and assuming none of them are there because they have junk in them, I use this to mark all of the builds that got upgraded with electric assemblers, and for us to go there and check them out. And here's one of them. Although this isn't electric assemblers, it's still part of the build. So the compromise to making these builds more entertaining than just snap my fingers and say it's done now is that you will get to see them all get hooked up for the first time. So it should be a whole lot of new builds being fired up, and it I think will actually be pretty cool. We've done stuff like this before, but there goes the fuel. There goes the liquid glass, and it looks like I didn't actually send any hot air here, so we still have to do that. But there it is. It's very noisy in here, and that's making most of our glass. I didn't actually check to see what our output of liquid glass would be for this, and that's 45. So it's actually nowhere close to filling this up all the way. And I think I'm fine with that. That if we need more production, we can make more glass elsewhere. One thing I do when I make builds is I build for the future, not for the present. And I do that so builds will grow with us and not just immediately become outdated. So I am expecting in the future that we will be able to fully utilize this by expanding our quartz and glass production when we need to. This is kind of the maximum output of this mine anyway, because of how many miners we have. We really couldn't do any more. It's already 15 a second. But also, this build being too big doesn't really matter. It'll just work as fast as it can work. And if we ever find that we need more glass, we can just mine more quartz somewhere and build this up. So that's kind of why I build things the way that I do. But anyway, while we've been sitting here, well, I don't know how much he started with. I think he was mostly empty, but nonetheless, you can see that he is building up glass very quickly. Okay then, it's time to start hooking up all of these builds and see how they work. Hopefully the factory holds out. That in testing, even though the factory is mostly dormant because just about everything that had an assembler is now non-functional because there's no assembler there anymore, it still ended up using about 800 megawatts at maximum. So you can kind of see on the 10-hour graph here that certainly right now the factory is extremely low. Previously you can see that just the testing was making it high. So we still may need to expand our power plant, but we'll build them one at a time and see what the power ends up being. It is important to note that I built these setups based on trying not to have any single limit. So in other words, I spread the load around. And let's look at this build here. Technically, if this was going at full blast, it would use more than 15 plates a second, but nonetheless, I tried to build them and size them based on roughly one belt of item. That said, it's not like all of these could run at full blast all at the time, but also they don't need to. I just wanted to try to maximize output without going crazy. And this will be a massive increase to production. And now, all of the raw resources that we've been making in such large quantities is going to start to become useful, because now we'll be able to expand our factory much more aggressively than we did before. We still have to manually build things, which sucks, but we're not that far away from robots doing it for us. Alright, that's enough talking. Let's get into it here. First, we have our line that makes the various belt-based items. And if you want to see the numbers, they're up there. And for the most part, I used these larger containers. Like for example, the shed. It's not much bigger than a steel chest, so it's not very useful in that sense, but it is useful because it's a big thing to click on. So for example, this little wooden chest here, let's say you're zoomed out, that's actually a pretty small thing to click on. And I mean, you can, but it's a lot easier both see and click on something. I guess we actually have to be near it to open it. So that's kind of why I used a lot of sheds here, and I'm thinking that I must have made that decision right there. And another advantage of the shed is that you can actually get 4 inserters on it, because you can do this. Whereas if you have a 1x1 chest, you can only get 1 inserter on it. But nonetheless, we have the room for the shed here. So let's do it. And yeah, that should be pretty good. Let's start hooking everything up. So the first machines here make the belts from rubber and then put those rubber on the same belt as the spare parts. And then the belt machines make their belts and put them on this bottom belt. And any machines that need the belts will then pick them up. So right here we are making our splitters. And any belts that are not used for these other processes will then go through to be inserted into this big storehouse. Not that we need this many belts, it's just we need to get a bunch of inserters on it. So that's why we have the storehouse. So you see a lot of weird stuff going on here, like one belt being turned into 2. And the reason we're doing that is just to get all of these inserters on it. So we needed to get 12 inserters on the top and 12 on the bottom. So the one belt was split into 2. Of course, because all these other processes are running, that it's not running at full speed because it's further down the line. But that's okay, because just in the time that I was talking, we're already at 50 splitters. And now that machine isn't running anymore. And then the final storehouse here is being controlled by the actual belt, because I think this is much more UPS friendly to just stop a belt than it is to stop all of these inserters. And a lot of these machines aren't necessarily running at full speed, and that's fine. And I still built this in a way that it could grow with us in the future. For example, if we got faster belts or we got belt stacking, then suddenly we would actually be able to run all of these machines at the same time at full power. But for example, look how the output of belts is 14. So that's kind of why I size things like this, is because it would almost max out this output, but not quite. It's not super important, but nonetheless, I do try to balance builds and just not have them be hilariously oversized. And there we go. Just in the time of talking, we now have 200 undergrounds. And now the full output of this is going into this storehouse here. And it's going to build up to 3,000, which is the same number of belts that our other minibus was holding on to. And meanwhile, all of this is working correctly. It's really cool seeing all of that junk on there. It looks like it's a bunch of different types of items, but it's just one. That's what the spare parts look like. And this right here is the outpost which supplies spare parts to the various parts of our factory that need it, because that's not really something worth belting around. So how is power? Well, certainly it spikes, and the big spike is electrolyzers, because despite using rubber, the belts are a very iron heavy item. So of course we're going to see that, but nonetheless, it's actually kind of funny that our power output is actually quite small right now, just because almost the entire factory is dormant. Okay, then let's go down. The next line of machines here makes inserters, and a lot of the same things are going on, where we have these sheds. Again, in this case, to get more inserters on it, but also it's just easier to click on. This is actually for the next build, but since it's in the same line, I'll talk about it. That this is stone that is necessary for stone furnaces. And the reason why I put the stone here rather than belting it, even though it's a terrible item to ship because it only stacks in 50, I did this because very little manufacturing actually uses stone for anything. Actual entities, the only things that it goes into is rails and stone furnaces. It's actually kind of funny. And of course, the stone furnaces do go into other things, but you can kind of see that stone isn't really something that's worth belting around the factory for finished products. It is a raw product and goes into tons of things, but for our main bus here, no, it doesn't really need to be here. So that's why that is there. And he is kind of blocking things a little bit, so let's send him on his way so we can kind of see. We have a splitter here again, splitting things into two just to get enough inserters on that machine. And it's kind of weird how this works, but it's actually going to the end of the bus here to start making inserters, and then they start getting filled in the other direction. So there's all of the things. You can see nothing happens, but then it finally gets to the end. And now we're making mechanical inserters, and we are storing them because they are a handcrafting ingredient into certain buildings. So it's going to run at half speed until we have enough of them in there. And I guess you can see the production block there if you need to. It was sized based on 7.5 items as a limiting factor. So this belt right here specifically has 7.5 plates and 7.5 chromium. And that is why it was sized like that. When I'm deciding what items should be on a bus line here, I basically look at, are they either related items that can be direct inserted, or are they related items based on their inputs? So in other words, this next line here doesn't really have that many input belts because they all kind of use the same things. So that's kind of how I tried to group everything, because if you're not careful about how you group things, you can just have a whole bunch of unrelated machines in a giant long line, and it can just be difficult because despite us having long inserters, you still need to actually get the items in here. And if you have too many different types of items, it can be difficult. But this is going pretty quietly. There's nothing super exciting about it. Definitely it is limited on iron. And it is going to build up, I think, about 200, of each inserter type. And just in the time of talking there, this has stopped because we now have 3,000 belts. I would say this sizing is pretty good. It's not necessarily that we need the items this fast, but if our factory has the production capacity, and we can do it all with essentially 1 or 2 machines, why not just use our factory's output? So I'm not saying we need belts this fast, but if we can make them, it would just be kind of a waste to not make them, because there could be a day when we want those items. So there was no point in building the factory this big if we don't actually use the output for anything. And of course, power output is increasing, but it's okay so far. So this here has very few inputs, because most of it is either iron or spare parts. And you'll definitely notice that iron and spare parts are used in large quantities on everything. So a lot of builds have either a full belt of iron or a full belt of spare parts, and that's the closest one to the machines just because that's where you can put the fastest inserters. And this one actually has them on both sides. So here we go. And now we're doing the machines that require lots of pipes. And let's open it up if you want to look at it. So right here we're making our steam engines, which is a intermediate component which goes into tons of things. And of course it's basically using all of the resources because these steam engines are actually super heavy on iron. It is sized basically around iron as the limiting factor. It's still more than 15, but it's close enough to it to where that seems like a good number to go with. And of course we're using the iron for other things, so it's going to meter out when it can here. But even still, while talking, we've got 25 of them, so it's looking pretty good. And I tested these, but I didn't necessarily see how fast they worked, that just like that, we now have our 200 inserters there. And now it's going to crank up the speed of these other items because now they can go down the line. There's something very satisfying about all of this. Now, one thing I didn't do is stop the resources on a belt if it wasn't needed anymore. For example, the rubber is only needed up until here. So all of the rubber past that point is just on the belt and can't be used. And that is a little inefficient, but the problem is it's just kind of really obnoxious to stop items and only let half of the belt go through. Especially if, say, what happens in the future, you want to expand this bus to include more items, and then suddenly you want that rubber again, but you already stopped it here and you have to unstop it, and it's just kind of annoying. So I figured it would just look cleaner and be easier to just have all of the items go to the end of their belt, even if they're technically not needed at that point anymore. And there we go. We have finished making inserters, 200 of each kind. And you can see a little bit of stuttering going on here with our iron. And that does make sense that technically this build can only do 27 iron a second, not 30. But there we go, 100 steam engines. And things are going down the chain, making our electric miners. And then if we input the stone here, it will go into making the stone furnaces, and then those stone furnaces are direct inserted in both the left and right directions because those machines require them. So we're making burner drills as well as the boilers because all of these things are intermediate handcrafting components for our pie buildings. So that's why they're all being put in storage buildings, even though we technically don't use stone furnaces anymore. We still need them. It is important to make sure, because production speed is so high here, that these machines do all actually stop, that I did set the correct limits to all of these. So it is important to make sure that they stop, because otherwise we're going to have an entire full shed of items very quickly. So I don't really want to trust that it works. I want to make sure that it works. It's kind of funny seeing this, but there's actually 7 inserters here. The reason why there isn't an inserter right here is because I put the splitter here to put items back, and this slot is blocked, so if we put an inserter here, it wouldn't actually pick up anything. I guess 7 would have fit right here, but then we would have had to put a power pole down here, and I guess I decided this was better, because I like having my square power poles everywhere. Also, each one of these builds was spaced based on the distance of a power pole, just to give maximum space between the builds in case more belts need to go through there later. And there we go, we have maxed out on drills. And everything else is going to run for a little bit more. It's kind of going based on the speed of this one furnace crafter, so it's going to take a little while. Okay, the next line here, and this is the last line, making all of the other random things. So we're going to be making engines, and we have 2 engine machines here. And here's all of the things. It's a big build. And we're doing 2 machines just because engines are a slow craft, so I figured it would be better to have 2 of them rather than the 1. And we have our pipes. The underground's going here, and regular pipes are actually being put in this outpost because we are moving them with caravans. And then our medium power poles and lights, which are also being moved by caravans, and there's 1 here waiting for it. And also some copper cable because that is a crafting resource. And looking at the numbers, this build is sized based on our 15 small parts a second. And here we go. I guess I saved this one for last because it had the most ingredients. So first we're making our rubber belts, and they're being placed on the far side. And then they're actually going underneath this storage shed here. And they stop because they're only being used on the engines. And each engine machine is flanked by its own pipe machine. And we have something weird going on, but it's inserting onto this belt here and then moving again to go into the storage shed. You could just put it on the ground or put it inside a chest, but putting items on the ground I think is a very crude way of doing things in Factorio, and I would rather not. I like to think of any item on the ground as being wrong. So you can use like deconstruction planners to pick up items off of the ground to clean up your factory and not have to worry about if you've got any jank going on, like something like this. So I just use the belt to protect that item. But this is all working correctly here. Everything is being produced. And oh, the caravan is here. He's in between the two machines. Because I thought I switched all of these, and it looks like it is working. And I'm going to keep saying it, but just like that, we are filled with those resources up there. And power output is continuing to increase, but it's holding. And there we go. We are maxed out on engines now. And maxed out on power poles. And it looks like the caravan left, so he got everything that he needed out of the lights. And there is no limit here because this is a caravan outpost. It's going to fill it up to the maximum that it can. And cable is very slow to make, but there is a limit there, and this guy is very slowly filling up on pipes. So yeah, that's looking pretty good. That is our new bus here. It took some work to make this, but it will be able to expand later. I decided not to add anything new to this, so right now all it's doing is making the same things we already were on this bus here. And that's because I figured in the future we would want to make more items on here, and it would just be easier having something better than this. That said, I analyzed the different items that we could put on here, and I didn't find anything that was really worth crafting on the bus. So for now, we will leave it like that. And I showed the factory search for the iron chest here. We can use that to go around our factory looking at all of the new builds. And I did a search for the assemblers, and here's all of the remaining assemblers in the factory. There's not many. The two big builds here, well, one of them is our minibus, and the other one is for concrete, and I left that there in place for a reason. Other than that, the rest of these builds are not long for this world. I didn't replace them because putting an electric assembler in here would have made it so I would have had to rebuild the whole thing because it wouldn't have fit. But also, I knew that these builds are going to be replaced in the near future anyway, so there really wasn't a point to rebuilding them. It would just happen naturally. And technically, you don't really need to rebuild any of these because the burner assemblers only use 75 kilowatts, but it's like 2 megawatts for the electric assembler. So technically, if you're min-maxing, the burner assemblers are better, but I'm the kind of player that just likes to upgrade everything with the best technology that I have, rather than just trying to absolutely maximize everything. Besides, it's weird to use a burner assembler in a high-tech factory. So that's our assemblers for making batteries. We have the one here making these canisters, some petri dishes, you know, that iron chest, petri dishes, and caging frogs. All of these I think are going to be switched in the near future, so I figured we can just leave them. But other than that, that's the only ones. So here we go. Now we have 12 builds to visit, and let's go to the biggest change first. And how are all these going? Well, we filled up on our pipes, and everything has aggressively been going. Look at all the lights we have now. So I think that will work. I mentioned that most things technically aren't worth putting an electric assembler on. However, there are situations where you'd want to. The main one is if you're inserter limited, as opposed to assembler limited. And I want to come to our concrete build because if you remember when we built this, this was inserter limited. So we had to do all of this inserter stuff, all of this belt stuff, even though the machines were actually plenty fast. And you might be thinking, all right, Marsh, why didn't you rebuild this? Why are you waiting till now? Oh no, I rebuilt it. It's right here. This one assembler replaces all of this. So this is an example where this technology is very superior. And I kind of want to block these belts off because we need to build up a buffer to even see this thing go. because it's so fast that if we have no items, it's not going to go. And I'm guessing the reason why is because our factory was dormant for so long, but we were still making rubber and latex, that we were actually using up a bunch of stone. So we didn't actually have a buffer of it. Nonetheless, we are making some gravel, which is piling up very slowly. But this is all it is. And here's the build here. And the reason why it's so much smaller is just because we're not inserter limited anymore. We were able to get a full belt of inserters on each of these 3 corners. So if you look at the build, it needed not quite 1 belt's worth of items, but I just put 1 belt's worth of inserters on there anyway, because why not? That we needed basically a belt of gravel, a belt of sand, and a little bit of lime. So we've got the belt of sand, the belt of gravel, the little bit of lime, and then the output, and I didn't even need to use this side. So yeah, I didn't want to rebuild this because you might have forgotten what it looked like. And also it's satisfying to pull it out, but I really wanted to visually show how much simpler the new build is going to be compared to the old one. Also, I need this space because there's another build that isn't actually here yet because I wanted to place it right here, and I couldn't because of all of these assemblers. It's just so much junk in here. Okay, well, I was expecting to build up more than we did, because that wasn't a lot. And look at that, just like that, the factory is just about idling again. It's amazing how bursty it is. But once this gets to 10,000, there we go. It's gonna start metering out the stone, which causes it to get crushed, turning into gravel, and priority is given to making landfill. And I suppose we can just point it out since we're here, that this is what the landfill build looks like. Again, like the other building, it is making maximum use of every belt. So it's getting 1 belt of the soil, 1 belt of stone, and 1 belt of gravel. And it got that extra inserter in here just to get the full absolute belt, because you do need 13 in total. Right now there's no limit on this, but nonetheless, let's hook all this up so you can see how fast it is. And actually this machine can go at 60 items a second. So even doing all of this, it's still only going to go at quarter speed. But that's landfill for you. It's just slow. I say slow, this is so many inserters and it's still slow, but that's what it looks like. I was thinking we were going to need a bunch of landfill, so I kept making it, but we're nowhere close to hitting this lake here, so I don't think we need to worry about it. But just like that, it stops. Okay, well, without further ado, let's make some concrete, and boy is it going to be fast. So lime, sand, and gravel. Let's just hook that there. This is probably going to go in a different spot in a second here. And I did something very funny here where I had these 2 belts there in order to get all these inserters on here, rather than having them go sideways and have undergrounds. But it's funny looking, and it works. But there we go, that's what it looks like. It's very fast, and now all of the gravel is gone. So that was regular concrete. We also have the refined concrete here as well. This is the build for it, and I just put Ghost there because this is actually an important place where you can see where we have kind of a thoroughfare of items coming through here. So I really didn't want this build to go off to the side like this. I thought it would be a lot better to just put it here, and you can see that its size is perfectly suited to go right in here. And I recall when I built this, I did mention that I was intending on putting the electric assemblers in here, and I built it with that in mind. So I made sure there would be a space for it, and that's where we're at. I certainly didn't do that with certain builds, like right here, because the space wasn't there, but many cases I did. So that's why upgrading this has been relatively straightforward. I guess it is important to note that I took out 1/2 of our limestone here because this machine runs so fast and we just don't need tiles that fast that it really didn't need that much limestone. So I took that build out and it was right here, and in its place I actually put stone bricks. Stone bricks were previously being made on our tar processing here, and it was in a weird spot and required stone to come up there, and I think we put it there because it needed to use pitch, but actually pitch is already coming through here anyway to make our asphalt tiles, which we need to turn on. So pitch and stone is already right here. So why not make the stone bricks here as well? And I also upgraded its speed, so this will put out almost 15 items a second, but it takes the 15 items of input, and that is why it was sized like this. So it's pretty straightforward. In goes the stone, and I did not pipe in the pitch. I was wondering why nothing was happening. There we go. Lots and lots of bricks. And it's just going to fill this up pretty high. We probably don't need to have an entire outpost full of bricks, but whatever, it's going to fill up. Okay then, now we need to get this build in here. So this was not inserter limited, it was machine limited, so it's interesting to see that this build is essentially the same as this, just with better technology, and it's bigger because the assemblers are bigger. But it's functionally the same thing. Another satisfying build to remove. There's some weird walls right here, and I believe that's because at some point a caravan got stuck right there, and I just decided to discourage that behavior with a wall. The iron comes right here, which goes onto the two machines making the sticks, and it doesn't need to be on both sides of the belt, but it just is. And we've got some sticks in our inventory, so we can just throw them in here, and they get inserted into every machine. Looking good. So now the concrete and the steel go along the left side. They get picked up by every machine, and then they make the refined concrete, and they just insert onto the center belt, and in they go to storage. So much cleaner than what was there before. And yeah, we might just need to let this run for a bit so we actually have a nice selection of gravel so we can test out our other build here. Anyway, let's go around the factory looking for other builds we haven't touched yet, because our factory is still very dormant because there's a lot of things that just aren't working right now because they're waiting for us. So of course we've done that one. But how about let's go over there. This is just the iron sticks that is necessary for making zinc. And this is a full 15 items a second, so we're using this belt buffer method here in order to maximize the output. It works surprisingly well, but yeah, seems like it's working. That was a pretty easy one to do. Here we go, let's go up there. This is actually a new build that I have been making this ammo for the grapple gun kind of all over the place in different ways. It's just kind of weird because it needs regular coal, not raw coal, and I imagine that's because it wasn't really adjusted for Pi. So we have to grab it from somewhere that processes coal, but then also we need iron sticks. And I noticed that our power plant here, the only one of its kind that processes coal, is actually right next to a belt that has iron. So we can just throw it right on the corner here and just grab it. It's probably not great to put it here because more belts might want to come through here and down, but also I think this power plant is not going to be here for very long. So why not put it in here? And I put 4 inserters here to remind myself that it needs 4. So we put that in there, and away it goes. It's just kind of stealing a little bit of coal off of that belt right there. And just going to fill up to 1 stack's worth of ammo. So that one's pretty easy. Okay, let's go to circuits. This machine right here is making the solder that we need. So our circuits have completely stopped. And I kind of want to unhook it right here, because we're about to pull that entire belt out. We still got our pre-splitter jank here of using mechanical inserters to pull items off of belts, and it works, so I'm not touching it. It was all sized exactly right back then, so there's no reason to mess with it. But it's making solder. And we had 2 more machines here making the cable necessary for the air core inductors. Also for circuits. So there they go. What else? 4 left, huh? Alright, down to trees. It's kind of amazing all of the things that assemblers were doing, but also amazing they weren't really doing that much. There's so many Pi machines that aren't assemblers that really there's not that many parts of the factory that actually use them. But nonetheless, so much of the factory has been completely dormant because of this. But we had an assembler making the tree seeds. Sorry, that's kind of blocking that right there, but in it goes. And what it's doing here is inserting into this chest, which is a buffer chest because this is also where the decay seeds go to. And that actually hadn't fallen behind at all. Okay, let's go to science. This did require completely rebuilding it because there was a bunch of very tightly compacted assemblers, so I needed to rebuild it. And I tried to put it in the same form factor, but it just didn't quite fit. But nonetheless, nothing was up here, so this is fine. By the way, this caravan outpost here with all of its random items was the first use of the caravan spreadsheet, and it has been working pretty uneventfully But it looks like we have a ton of spoilage, and that actually makes sense because the belts aren't hooked up, so we're going to have a long line of spoilage. But anyway, we've seen these kind of builds before. It's just making the first science, so we'll just pump it in. First, it makes the empty boxes, and if any spoilage, either the flora or the biomass makes it to the end, that one inserter will pick the items off. And why isn't this going? No soil. Ah yes, because we actually need to hook up the water. There we go, just direct inserting the soil because we can. And it has some filters on here to put the science packs onto this one belt, and if there is any spoilage in the machines, it also gets placed on this spoilage belt that then gets sent to where it needs to. So yeah, pretty uneventful. And we have definitely been running out of miners here, that a lot of these belts are not running at full speed anymore. And that's fine, I guess, as long as we don't have any power issues. Eventually we're just going to have to consolidate all of these belts, and then we just won't have enough belts out of it anymore, and we'll have to get them from somewhere else. But I've been really trying to put that off, especially because we may not need all these belts that we do right now because of this power plant, but we may be building a new power plant before that mine actually runs out. And it looks like that has run out as well, so now we are kind of short on the flora. So let's remove all of these buildings and try to do this a little cleaner. There we go, that's rapidly going. That is going to fully utilize the mine, but only keep items on one side. And if we want both sides, we can change it. Cool. What's left? One more down here. So we'll put in the rubber, which will cause the process to start up. That said, we're not really going to see anything move because we already had these science packs in here. And the inventory's so full. But we can pull them out to see it start up. So there's a lot of awkwardness going on in here, but the assemblers have been replaced. Well, now we're just down to our asphalt, which it looks like there is a buildup of items. This build is very similar to what came before it. It's just bigger and using the bigger machines, but the speed and output is essentially the same. So in goes the pitch, in goes the ash, and in goes the gravel. And there they go. The output is being placed on the same belt as the ash. And I'm not worrying about the little bits of ash that make it to the end. I'm just leaving them there. And we have filters to make sure that we're only pulling in the asphalt. So there we go. Those are all of the chests. So if we go back to assemblers, the only big build that's left is our minibus here. And of course, we do want to get rid of it. Gonna have so much junk in the inventory, but this is our junk building for now, so we'll just do that. And yeah, now we get to rip this out. We want to be careful not to break anything, but really none of this is actually doing anything anymore. Maybe just slice it right here. Just start walking down the chain. Like, I don't care. None of this needs to be here, except for some of these pipes that just so happen to go straight through. But no, this is so satisfying that I do not want to be careful about this. I want it gone. So we are just going straight across. If anything breaks, we'll figure it out later. Of course, a lot of these chests were full of various items, and I wanted to show the main bus actually operating at full power, so I did not take the items out of these chests and put them into those. We will just have a bunch of extras for a little while. It wouldn't have been a real test, and it wouldn't have been particularly satisfying. Oh, wow. Already full. If we had full chests and the main bus didn't actually operate. There we go. Goodbye. And, yep, inventory junked. Well, there we go. The bus is gone. We do have this awkward belt, which I believe was delivering iron and copper for circuits, but we have full belts now. And it was going through the bus specifically to give priority, but it doesn't need to do that anymore. The factory continues to get cleaner, which is always nice to see. Okay, that's about as clean as our inventory is going to get. In the end, looks like we have about 83 burner assemblers that we pulled out of our factory. It's actually not that many, considering how big the factory is. And power seems fine. You know, it always spikes when there's iron use and the electrolyzers have to go, but surprisingly enough, it actually has held out just fine. So looking pretty good there. Our factory now has 117 automated factories. And with that, it's time to start on some new research. But that's going to have to wait until the next episode. Thanks for watching, and I will see you later.